Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Muskegon City Commission meeting for November 13th, 2018. Before we begin, I'd like to invite up our good friend George Monroe from Evanston Avenue Baptist Church to lead us in prayer. Anyone that would like to is invited to join in with us. And after that, we will have the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Mr. Monroe.
We pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for the privilege of being here, Lord. We thank you for this freedom that we have. Now, Lord, just view this meeting and guide and direct. We thank you for our commissioners and our mayor and our manager, Lord, that you'd undertake for them at all times. We'll give thee all the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, George. Well, good evening, Deputy Clerk Johnson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And may we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Gorin,
Here.
Vice Mayor Hood,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson, maybe he'll be here when I get through this. Commissioner Warren. Here. Commissioner German.
Here.
Commissioner Rinsma-Sibiga. Commissioner Turnquist.
Here.
Thank you. Before we begin the proceedings, we'd like to take a moment out to recognize the service of a number of our employees for the year 2018. And I'll be joined by Dwana Thompson. And if the members of the commission, city manager, would like to step forward as well, we can give our appreciation. Council.
Okay, so as I read the names, we'll have you come up and the mayor will give you your certificate and all the commissioners will congratulate you this evening. Marie Gilchrist. For 5 years of service.
Thank you.
Our city manager, Frank Peterson. 5 years of service. Terry Spike for 5 years of service. Amy Smiley for 10 years of service. Christopher Drake for 20 years of service. Scott Hemmelsbach for 20 years of service. Elizabeth Lewis for 20 years of service. Michael McGann for 20 years of service. James Maurer for 20 years of service. And Hope Mitchell for 20 years of service. We congratulate and thank each of you with deepest gratitude for your distinguished service, loyalty, and dedication to the citizens and staff of the City of Muskegon.
And thank you all. Thank you for coming out this evening and letting us share these few minutes.
We have one more.
Oh,
Oh my
Ruth.
gosh, Leslie Rowe.
We all going back out this far? She was hiding.
Leslie Ruth, get on up here. Oh, jeepers. How many years, Leslie? 20 years. Leslie Ruth Luttrell. No, it's not. Thank you, Leslie Ruth. You get extra leftovers.
Yes, you do.
I'm in a meeting.
May we have the consent agenda, please?
Item A, approval of minutes, City Clerk. Summary of request. To approve minutes of the October 12, 2018 goal-setting meeting and the October 23, 2018 regular meeting. Staff recommendation to approve the minutes. Item B, request for authorization to sign from Planning and Economic Development. Summary of request. Request to authorize Mike Franzak from the Planning Department to sign purchase agreements on closing documents for property transactions on behalf of the city. Staff recommendation. Staff recommends approval to authorize. Item C, purchase of 567 Leonard Avenue, Community and Neighborhood Services. Summary request, to approve the purchase of home located at 567 Leonard Avenue in the Jackson Hill neighborhood for the price of $35,000. After the sale, TERRACE will rehabilitate the single-family dwelling as part of the home-funded home buyers program. Staff recommendation to approve the request to purchase the property. Item D, set public hearing for amendment to the Downtown Development Plan and Tax Increment Financing Plan, Planning and Economic Development. Summary of request. To approve the resolution setting a public hearing for an amendment to the Downtown Development Plan and Tax Increment Financing Plan, and notifying the taxing jurisdictions of the plan amendment, including the opportunity to express their views and recommendations regarding the proposed amendment at the public hearing. The proposed amendment is to add certain properties to the tax capture. Staff recommendation to approve the resolution and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the resolution. Committee recommendation, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority unanimously approved the proposed amendment at their October 30 meeting. Item E, State Revolving Fund, Sewer Project Administration Assistance, Department of Public Works. Summary of request. Authorize staff to extend the existing engineering services agreement with Prine and Newhoff to provide administrative assistance during the implementation of the State Revolving Fund sewer projects in 2019 and 2020. Prine and Newhoff completed the preliminary plan for sewer upgrades that resulted in funding through the MDEQ for approximately $7.7 million in sewer upgrade projects for 2019 and 2020. Staff would like to retain Prine and Newhoff services to assist in the administration and oversight of these projects to ensure compliance with the MDEQ requirements and successful implementation of the projects. Staff recommendation, authorize staff to extend the existing engineering service agreement with Prine and Newhoff. Item F, replacement of storage area network, information technology, summer request. Currently, we have a storage area network array that holds 50 virtualized servers covering all city functions. The industry standard is to replace such critical SANs units every 5 years. Currently, we are approaching year 7. We have spent months meeting with multiple vendors, reviewing products and associated quotes. We are recommending Tay-Gile array proposal for the city of Muskegon. Of the 3 submitted, Tay-Gile came in at the lowest price and provides the best long-term value in features and performance. Tay-Gile units are also used in the Muskegon Central Dispatch Data Center and have the same technology. Having the same technology is beneficial to both. Staff recommendation, approve the Tay-Gile quote for $49,766.02.
Thank you. Commissioners, you've heard the consent agenda presented. Are there any items you wish to have removed for further discussion? Commissioner Johnson?
Item B.
You have a D?
B. is in bold.
I'm sorry. D. Any others? Commissioner Warren?
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented, minus item B.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Warren, seconded by Commissioner German to accept the consent agenda as presented minus item B. Any discussion?
B.
B. B. Boy. As in, boy, I can't hear very well. Roll call, please.
Mayor Garland,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Warren,
Yes.
Commissioner German,
Yes.
Commissioner Rinsma-Sibiga,
Yes.
Commissioner Turnquist,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item B, Commissioner Johnson.
I move to authorize Mike Franzik from the planning department to sign purchase agreements on closing documents for property transactions on behalf of the city. Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Johnson, supported by Commissioner Rinsma-Sibiga to recommend the authorization of Mike Franzik from Planning Department to sign purchase agreements on closing documents for property transactions on behalf of the city. Commissioner Johnson?
Just very quickly, I just want to understand the implication of this. So this is something that you're doing now, Frank? You have to sign off all of these, and basically you're just asking for Mike to be the stand-in?
Yeah, really, nobody's really ever asked us for this before, but the house on Second Street, we're moving towards closing on that. There's a signed purchase agreement that the commission approved. The title agency's asking for a resolution. And in anticipation of having those periodically, we thought that having a ongoing approval just makes sense versus having to come back here every time we're ready to close, just in case the timing doesn't line up. You know, if they were wanting to close, say, 3 days ago, could be a problem, you know, for them versus now. But we would, we'd anticipate they'd only be signing on property transactions in situations where purchase agreements have already been approved by the city commission. And I think Brian did point out something to me earlier today that maybe we can tweak this language to make that a little stronger. And I wonder if we just add in the word after and, so purchase agreements and related closing documents for property transactions on behalf of the city of Muskegon. Just to make sure that it's clear we're not giving them authorization to just go sign random closing documents, and have the authority to sell property, because we're not giving them the authority to sell, just authority to sign once the commission has already made a decision to sell.
Yeah. So already you or he are routinely signing these documents, it's just formalizing.
Yeah,
It's already been de facto.
I think when we did the Midtown Square ones, there was a combination of, I think Mike went to a number of them, Kathy went to some, Clark went to some, and I went to some, depending on who was available on the day of closing. This will be more clearly defined. We'll schedule them around Mike. We'll make it part of his duties to be there for the closings.
Okay. And then, maybe this is a question for legal counsel, but when it's saying on behalf of the city, is it implicit there that, these transactions have been approved by the commission already?
That's what Frank and I had discussed earlier, and perhaps before, or right after the word all, we could say all commission-approved purchase agreements or something to that effect to make it more clear if the commission would like.
Okay. Should I just amend my motion, include that language then? Recommendation? Okay. Then,
If that sounds good.
that works.
Yeah, I think that'd be
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, I'll just move to amend my motion to include language indicating all transactions approved by the commission. Is that the language you're suggesting?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner? Okay. So we have an amendment with the language is stated to the motion and approved second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Warren,
Yes.
Commissioner German,
Yes.
Commissioner Rinsema Sabinka.
Yes.
Commissioner Turnquist,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Mayor Gowron.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Here. Thank you. New business, item A, please.
Rezoning several properties, planning and economic development. Summary of request. Staff initiated a request to rezone 372, 380, 388, 394, 398, 406, and 414 Houston, and 1148 6th Street from R3 high-density single-family residential to form-based code, urban residential, to allow for more housing options. Staff recommendation, staff recommends approval of the rezonings. Committee recommendation, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the rezonings, plus the rezonings of 1246, 1252, and 1258 5th Street by a 7-1 vote with one member absent at the October 4 Special Planning Commission meeting. Staff has recently recommended to remove 1246, 1252, and 1258 5th Street from the request due to comments from the public.
Commissioner Rinsema Sabinka?
I move to approve the rezoning of the properties on Houston and the one property on 6th Street from R3 high-density single-family to form-based code urban residential.
Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Rinsema Sabinka, seconded by Commissioner Johnson, to approve the rezonings as outlined. Any discussion? Commissioner?
So I know this topic has been hotly debated one, I guess, and like I think the third month in a row, either the Planning Commission or the City Commission have dealt with this. I think that the compromise, for lack of a better word to put it, is okay. I think that the properties on 5th Street, I would advocate that we try to pursue housing at those properties if possible. I know there's been discussion of the park, but I think if the park is maintained at the current location, that it makes the most sense for there to be housing next to the park, and that the whole point of Midtown Square was to catalyze further development, and this being a parcel that is directly adjacent from the Midtown Square project, that, we would like to see something happen there, and that was kind of the impetus. I think when, the city invests in something, they're looking to catalyze something to, get some other people to do something in the areas next to where they're investing. So I would, I'm somewhat reluctantly, this kind of limits the options for people to develop housing at that property, so it just keeps the single family zoning. But I guess at this point, it's a workable temporary solution, and I think we should continue to see how things develop. But I think that this commission has pretty much, whenever there's been a development opportunity, has been usually pretty accepting of that. I mean, of all kinds of development, market rate, all city developments. So I'm a little bit hesitant to just push a development that where there's people who actually have an interest in doing something aside, because my sense is that that's kind of a chilling effect, that people are not going to do anything, and I think that that's really not the message we want to send, especially in that area where in the North Nelson neighborhood we're trying to get more dense urban environment. So all that to say, I reluctantly accept this motion, and hopefully we'll continue to see more appropriate development in the North Nelson neighborhood.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Warren, did you have something?
Commissioner German.
Oh, Commissioner German.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some clarity on the three addresses on 5th Street that I guess Commissioner Singh was commenting on. That's on the corner right by the park, right?
Monroe.
Okay. And that's part of the communication that I received from some of the public that was kind of opposed of development being developed on that corner. I apologize for not making it to some of the meetings because actually I was in a car accident, so just to let everyone know I would have been there. But I did take the emails, phone calls. Historically, and hearing from other neighborhood associations also, I know when we passed this form-based code was to, get these lots and start to develop on them. I'm finding out, hearing from the constituents and some of the neighborhood associations, that historically, they want to keep this area as a single-family resident home, not these new projects or duplex homes or whatever. And I think for the most part of it, that Midtown Square development that we have actually across the street, actually if we had some single-family homes on that corner or either expanded that park to the corner, that would kind of fit within that neighborhood and kind of keep it kind of historically. So I'm not in favor of the development on it, and actually, and who's headed that project for the development for the houses on that corner?
There is no.
There's no special, okay.
We don't even own the property yet, and it hasn't been disclosed.
Okay. And I did read something where I guess the organization Encompass wanted to develop on that property. Was that a request or?
They were at least in the initial stages. If the land was rezoned, they were in the initial stages of considering a concept for that site. They've since told us that they're going to explore other sites for that particular development. So as of right now, there is nobody, lined up to develop single family or otherwise on that site.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I generally agree with Commissioner Winston this evening's sentiment on what our vision has been for that area and what we'd like to see happen. And we would like to see more houses being developed, more housing options being developed as infill to help support our downtown and further improve that particular neighborhood. But I think it's appropriate right now just for us to take a pause on those few parcels. So I do appreciate Community Encompass, withdrawing its request for these to be rezoned, as well as staff's recommendation not to rezone these properties at this time. I think it's important for us to get a handle on the park itself, since we don't own that park. It's just leased, and it's very important, particularly as we're looking for greater density in our downtown and downtown surrounding neighborhoods, that when we're trying to promote density, that we have adequate green space and public parks available, because residents will have fewer and fewer personal green spaces, and so we need to make sure that there's space to accommodate that elsewhere. So I would like, before I'm open to development there in the future, but I'd like us to get a handle on the park itself and make sure that we can ensure its security long-term as available for our surrounding residents. As for the particular project or that had been proposed initially for that property, I think it still has a place in our downtown area, and in my understanding, Community Compass has explored other options, and there are other options available in the neighborhood. So us not taking the step to rezone this right now, I don't see that as pushing them aside. We have been receptive generally to developers that come to us, whether they be market rate, low income, nonprofit or whatnot. So I don't see it as pushing them aside. It's just not this location, and I'm sure our staff will be more than happy to accommodate them, looking for other options and work with them to make that happen. Just right now, I think it is appropriate to take a pause. And listening to feedback from our residents. I think that's important. We do public hearings on these rezonings to get that feedback, and overwhelmingly the feedback was not to rezone it. And so I think we need to take that into consideration as well, which I think we have in this situation. So I'm pleased with how this has transpired in the end, but I am also open to potential residential development there in the future, you know, in concert with working with our neighbors and residents. So, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner?
I just want to point out that I think when this was discussed the most about the Fifth Street parcels was at the Planning Commission meeting, and I don't think it was overwhelming either way, so I just would want to reflect on that use of overwhelming and say that this topic has been discussed at 4 Nelson neighborhood meetings, the Planning Commission twice, and the City Commission, and I think overwhelming is not the right word to use, especially when probably the best representation of people was at the Planning Commission meeting, which I attended, and it was about 50-50 if I had a guess. So I'm just requesting to be careful about how that's characterized.
To qualify, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I was also at that Planning Commission meeting, and yes, it was fairly balanced. I would say it probably leaned against it. But when I say overwhelming, I'm specifically referring to the people that were notified of the public hearing, which is the immediately surrounding property owners, and the people that I spoke to in that area were overwhelmingly against it.
Any others? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Warren?
Yes.
Commissioner German?
No.
Commissioner Rinsema-Sittiga?
Yes.
Commissioner Turnquist?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Gowron?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hood?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. New business, item B, please.
Parking restrictions, December 1 through April 1, public safety. Summer requests. The Director of Public Safety requests that the Commission approve the changes for Chapter 92, L09 of the ordinance regarding the snow emergency parking between December 1 and April 1. Parking will be allowed between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. on odd or even calendar days based on the odd and even numbered street addresses. Between 5 p.m. and 5 a.m., parking will be allowed on both sides of the street. Where parking is currently allowed on only one side of the street, parking is allowed except between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. All signed parking restrictions apply all days of the week. This section applies to every portion of every block of every city street. Staff recommendation: staff recommends approval of the parking restrictions changes to the Code of Ordinances.
Commissioner Warren?
I move to approve the parking restriction changes to the Code of Ordinances.
Did I get a second?
Second.
Okay. Been moved by Commissioner Warren, seconded by Commissioner Rinsema-Sittiga to approve the parking restriction changes to the Code of Ordinances. And you're leading out on this, Chief?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Before we start though, staff recommendation had 6 points that we were trying to make. I noticed in the agenda there was only 5 points read, and so I want to add one because West Western was one that we wanted to add that the odd and even would not take place on from Terrace to 7th on just West Western. That is our so-called downtown merchant district. That would be the 2 to 6 a.m. only for maintenance, that you could park on both sides of the street there, because we can't imagine people subway moving to the other side and live and so on and so forth. So I'd like to add that point, along those 5 that Ms. Grimm just read. I want to add that 6th point if that's possible, because it's very important that West Western be added in there, and that there would just be no parking from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. for street maintenance. Start off.
Commissioner Turnquist?
What does this do to the parking on the terrace?
Well, that's another issue I was going to get to in a minute. If we look at what they call Local Ordinance 7, Local Ordinance 7 talks about the terrace parking is illegal in the city of Muskegon, except for under the old ordinance, you could park on the terrace between December 15th and February, and the last day of February. We didn't address it in this one. We're only changing LO9. That's Local Ordinance 9, which Ms. Grimm just read to you. That's what we're changing. So we can have a discussion about the terrace If we don't do anything, it will be allowed this year between December 15th and the end of February, which is not in line with our new seasonal parking ban, which goes from December 1st to April 1st. I know that sounds confusing, but we may come back to you at the last meeting of this month and amend local ordinance 7 to reflect what is passed tonight. We thought we'd leave it alone until the mayor and the commissioners could talk about terrace parking or no terrace parking. Because we're allowing now, on an odd day, you can park on the odd side of the street. On an even day, you can park on the even side of the street. And that will work about 95% of the city, except for our streets that only have parking on one side, which we've addressed here. That would be no parking 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Okay, so we're gonna see how that works out, but there again, this is new, and we're not sure the behavior of all the residents understanding the odd and even and so on and so forth. They've always been used to parking on the terrace. So, we've had issues in the past too that they need places to park. So I guess the question is today is, what do you think about the odd and even and those other 4 caveats I put in place, and then the terrace parking? What is the commission and the mayor's thoughts about allowing the terrace parking along with the odd and even? If that answers your question.
So that will still be up in the air after this vote, and you're gonna bring it back to us.
If you don't do anything about the terrace parking, by ordinance, it's going to be allowed from December 15th to the last day of February. But it wouldn't cover the first 15 days of December or the month of March, which our new seasonal winter restriction parking covers. So that can be a little confusing.
Commissioner, Ms. Sabanka?
Why the extension of the time? I thought we pretty specifically went from December 15th to the end of February, and that was because there's hardly any snow in March, and not that, less also in the first part of December.
That's what we did before, and like we said, last year was a kind of a mild year, so what we did, and we still can do it, even though this is our winter restriction, if we decide at the end of February it's pretty decent, we can lift that and continue on with our regular season parking. We can always do that. But one thing that happens when you end it on the last day of February, as with last year, we had a pretty mild March, and then April got really ugly. We got through that, but generally, March would be much worse than April, so we can leave it in place. And this is different because you can actually park on the streets, both sides, every day from 5P to 5A with this new ban. You can park there, on both sides. Just during the day from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., you have to retreat to either the odd or the even side. Because that's when, we talked to DPW, that's when the maintenance is going to occur. They have like what they call emergency plowing and trucks out in the middle of the night. But 90+% of the time, the trucks are out between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. That's what we felt was important, that our seasonal parking plan would be aligned with our maintenance. That's the whole goal of this.
Okay, follow up?
So you have to park basically the night before in the place that's permitted at 5 a.m. the next morning. So if you're parking overnight on the street, I'm trying to understand how this works
Let's say
for
you
people.
parked on the 30th and tomorrow morning's the 1st. If you don't feel like moving your car at 5, 6 a.m., you should park it on the proper side of the street.
And then you're not violating it before that, right?
No, then if you just get home for 7 p.m., you plan on going to work, let's say
Yeah.
5 the next morning, you just park where you want,
Okay.
get up and go to work, you're good. But like I said, our goal here, because really no time was good, but this time, our goal and objective was to target when DPW does the maintenance.
Sure. Oh,
They start at 5 a.m. and by 5 p.m., they are pretty much done, unless we have some major snow event. And a couple years ago, we put together what we call a winter snow declaration. And if we get a 2-footer,
Yeah.
I hope it didn't jinx us. If we get a 2-footer, the mayor can declare a snow emergency, and then all this is off the table. We would go to the snow emergency. So we have a plan for a major snowstorm. This would be our seasonal plan for our normal winter, if there is such thing as a normal winter. And then, you know, it's the odd and the even, and then on the streets like Houston, because I see some people from Houston here, they would be allowed to park on their side of the street except from 2 AM to 6 PM. And then I think DPW would concentrate on those streets during that time.
Well, that is another, I kind of wonder why that, because I live on a street that's only parking on one
Yeah.
side, so, you know, and they never plow between 2 and 5, so most of the time that we're having our car off the street now, really the only hour that you actually maybe need it off the street, and I found from experience, they never plow between 5 and 6, they always plow at 9 AM, so
Right.
if your car is back on the street, it's still causing a problem.
That's how it used to be. We used to ban parking in the entire city from 2 AM to 6
Yeah.
AM, and there was
But
no,
that's what you're suggesting to keep doing on the,
just on the few.
Yeah.
And we have a lot less streets, like Peck, Sanford, Houston, your street. I mean, there's very few now that have just the one side.
If I could, Dan, are you saying that maybe because there's fewer streets that 2 to 6 AM would apply to, maybe we expand that a little
well, I'm
bit
just
and
wondering
keep them
why
off
the
till
not,
10 AM?
why not keep it something somewhat consistent? I mean, you're banning people to park from a time that's, you're not plowing anyways,
Yeah.
but.
The
Whatever.
reason 2 AM to 6 AM was originally selected was it was just, we were really not trying to get them off the streets when we were plowing per se.
Yeah.
It was just to make them move their car every day somewhere. And then eventually they would move it to a different place and we can whack that spot that they had been,
Yeah.
parked in.
Yeah.
But,
And Commissioner, now we do have trucks out. They have emergency trucks out in the night, the mains and intersection stuff. And Leanne is here, she can address that. But those few streets we have now are a lot less than our full city. And during that time, I don't know if Leanne, if you want to address that, if those emergency trucks would do those streets between 2 and 6, and answer the Commissioner's question, I don't know.
Yeah, if we're having a big event, then we can call people in at midnight. So there's.
My guess is though that, as I've experienced for many years, is most of the plowing's done not on an emergency basis, and there's lots of cars on Houston and campus getting plowed in because, you know, it's 10 in the morning and they've been gone for breakfast or whatever, and they come back and they're sitting there. It especially happens on weekends more, but.
Right, and, you know,
Yeah.
there are streets where you have trouble getting people to move their cars
Yeah.
and you can't.
I don't know if it would make any sense to do it from 5 AM to 9 AM. That's when they're actually plowing, and if you're trying to get people to move, then they would move, and I don't know if that would cause more inconvenience. You know, it has a lot to do with when people generally sleep and when they come home from work and different stuff like that, but.
I'm sure it would be more.
Sure.
Vice Mayor?
I was just gonna, chime in, and Dan said the same thing. I was just wondering, was there a solution to that problem on those? And especially if they're only plowing, they start at 9, but if we got them off the street from 2 to 6, is that, something that can be implemented, that they get plowed, those streets at somewhere between those times?
My feeling would be that it would be harder to off the street than.
And that's kind of what, Dan, well,
Yeah.
Commissioner Singer was trying to get at, was getting at. So,
We- I was gonna say, we probably could shift it, but I'm also wondering too if I've got a feeling if in front of my house, I knew they're coming through at 9, I wouldn't park there at 9. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if we shift it, then for sure they can't park there at 9, but also if it's 2 AM to 6 AM and I'm typically coming home at 9 and they're constantly missing my spot, I would just, you know, make it a point, you know, a couple times a week to move up a block or around the corner and let it get done. And it seems like that could be more convenient for people than eliminating their ability to park there at 9 AM every single day. And just let the people recognize when their streets are being plowed and pay attention to that, and maybe just kind of naturally, I don't wanna say get out of the way, cause some of them, Commissioner Rinsman-Simicus probably does get done at 9, but other ones might get done at noon, and other ones might get done at 1 o'clock.
It's
And
more
this-
during the day.
Yeah.
It's never
It
before.
is. We get hit in the afternoon up on the hill.
So there probably won't be a perfect time to do it, but as long as people have multiple, so to speak, places to move to, we should be able to dodge all those the problems where, I'm always parked in the same place at 9 AM and my spot's never plowed. Because the simple solution would be, hey, drive around the corner for just one day and they'll come through and they'll get it on the next round of snow removal. But you're not obligated to necessarily do it.
Let me warn you too, the reason, we had talked about this 5 AM to 9 AM, getting out the streets. But the only problem is around a lot of the schools, there's only parking on one side. So now we're telling the schools, you can't park on your street from 5 AM to 9. That's when everyone comes to the schools. That's what the problem was, and there is multiple locations like that. That's why the 2 to 6, that's her operation. We know they're getting moved, but also like, let's go back to a street like Houston. Even if you have parked, say you parked there, like you said, you got off between 2 AM and 6 AM. We come through and plow at, let's say, 9 AM. The goal is to plow the streets. And so sometimes you do get plowed in, but if you have plowed Houston, you've gotten both lanes except the parking lane, for instance. So the street's clear. The parking isn't, you're gonna always run into some kind of inherent problem like that. Especially around a school, because if I tell a school, you ain't parking here from 5 AM to 9 AM, they go, are you kidding me? That's when everybody comes to our school, between 7 and 9 AM. We get some kickback there, I believe.
Commissioner Warren?
So I have a question. You talked about the 2 AM to 6 AM for West Western.
Yes.
What about other business districts? What about Lakeside? What about
Or even Clay Avenue.
Clay? Yeah, what about Pine? Other business districts? Has there been an idea to maybe apply the similar 2 AM to 6 AM for other, 3rd Street would be another one?
We looked at that and it kept growing and growing and growing.
Sure.
And so that's something we're gonna have to see how this works out. But we could quickly see that, of course, West Western is our main area, that we had to do something there. Because the odd and even is quite complex. And the city's really big and we have multiple business districts, but that's our main one. That's our so-called downtown. But we're not seeing as much of a problem on Clay as we do on West Western, simply because, there's parking lots and we don't quite have a lot of storefronts there yet.
Well, but I worry on like 3rd Street, for example. So we've got
Yeah.
the bid where the sidewalk is more likely to be clear.
Yeah.
You can park on either side of the street, and we're trying to develop these other areas. And the sidewalk could have pretty high snow that's inconvenient to go through, and you might not find a place to park. So I just worry about what that might imply for some of our other business areas that we're trying to develop.
Lakeside would be covered because that's only parking on one side of the street, so they would just have the 2 to 6 AM. So they could park there all day. I gotta make sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You only park on one side
You
of the
can't
street.
park on the hot dog side?
No.
No longer hot.
Look closer, see.
I love that.
I'm not sure when businesses are the busiest on 3rd, but keep in mind in the evenings between 5 PM and 5 AM, you can park on both sides of the street.
Right.
So it's just 5 AM, 5 PM that you need to choose a side.
I will agree to that. Probably that Clay and 3rd are two that might make a lot of sense to treat similar to Western, at least Clay from TERRACE to 5th, at least down on the other side of the museum, because there are a lot of people that go to the Lakeshore Museum Center during the day, and they don't have a whole lot of dedicated parking. A lot of people use the street there too, and 3rd Street makes a lot of sense. And I think if I remember, with 3rd Street facelift or the streetscaping that we're doing, are we moving that all onto one side of the road, do you recall? Or is it gonna be on both sides of the road still?
We'll still have parking on both sides.
So that section, maybe we might talk about doing something with on 3rd Street, at least from Muskegon to Monroe, might make sense to deal with,
Yeah.
to treat it that same way as well.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a great question and point, Commissioner Warren, that we need to be looking at some of these other commercial districts like Third and Clay, as Frank just indicated. I mean, aside from the museum, we got the college, students coming to that. So we need to be expanding. If we're going to move forward with this odd even, we need to be exploring other commercial areas that should get a reprieve so we're not undermining their business, so to speak, by limiting parking options for them. So as I understand it, the streets that don't have parking on both sides are going to be exempt, and they're just going to have to adhere to the 2 to 6 a.m. rule. So we're going to have two different sets of regulations depending on if you do or don't. Okay. That might be a decent workaround. I mean, because I'm also someone on a street that's only one side that has parking, and that side's packed. The whole thing every night is just car upon car upon car. So that would be really unmanageable to do.
Yeah.
Are we going to be putting out signs across our city indicating that the odd even schedule and the time limits and everything else? Like, how are, aside from putting out a press release and putting it on Facebook and giving warnings for the month of December like we do now?
Right.
How are we going to communicate this to residents? this
And
new
all the
policy?
current signs, there's a lot of current signs would be incorrect, right? There's a lot of signs that say no parking 2 to 6.
I don't know if there are a lot.
Yeah,
I've seen them, so that's what I think people are gonna look up. I mean, I can imagine the photos already of people getting tickets with the sign right there. So,
Right.
so,
I think most of those are kind of on our main corridors and freeways in the city.
Okay.
So I don't think it'd be too difficult to replace those.
yeah. I mean, I think
I'm pretty sure what
that
we
cities
would put
usually
on
do that as you're entering, so that, you know,
Right.
it applies throughout the city. So, I mean, just because it's there, that, I mean, it still is applying on every, you know, other street too.
Right,
You're seeing it there.
We thought we would treat this as a pilot year, so we do think that signing is needed for sure. Until we get it where we want it, we're a little hesitant to put signs all over the city when we place it next year. But we need to change it or something, so.
Okay, that explains why there's no, when it says financial impact, none, because we're not planning on putting any signs up for the first year. Okay. I'm concerned. I mean, just like you said, we might have to tweak it in a year. I'm a little concerned. I mean, we need to tread very carefully on this because I think it was my first year on the commission. That was 4 or 5 years ago. We changed the winter parking, and it was kind of a mess. And we went back to what it had been for many, many years. So the current system is what people know of historically. And so if we're changing it again this year and it doesn't work out and we have to revert or further tweak, I'm just concerned of us changing it multiple times and just sowing confusion amongst our residents and getting this word out. Honestly, I want to know because when we changed it last time to revert back to what it had been for, I think, all my life.
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that?
No.
We stopped having the get off the street for 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Like, we
I think
just,
it was
that's
one
what he's
season.
talking about.
Is
So
that-
we
yeah.
just, we lifted this whole thing and it was a free-for-all for like 2 seasons, and then the second season was horrid, and then we basically went back to the system we had before that.
Yeah, which is the banning of the overnight parking. Because we'd lifted that and it was a mess. And so then we
Yeah.
put it back. And at
That's
the-
not ringing a bell.
No,
Yeah,
for
that's
2 seasons, you could park on the street overnight.
Yeah.
You could, and I would know because I have no parking spot, so I parked on the
Right,
street
right,
for
right.
Yeah.
2 seasons overnight, and it was great.
Right.
And now you're struggling to find a parking spot again. So that's what what happened.
Yeah, and that's why I guess I'm just encouraging us to tread carefully here, so we're not changing it so frequently that it's causing confusion. And so when we went back to the previous system where we put the ban overnight parking again, we had talked about odd even parking. They do that in Grand Rapids. At that time, we said, well, has this been explored? Is this possible? And we were told, no, that's not a good fit for our city. It works for Grand Rapids. It's not a good fit for our city, given our street layout and where there's parking, not parking, and so on and so forth. So aside from change in leadership, which I think that's a key factor in just an assessing situations, aside from that, what other factors have changed? What analysis has been done that shows that this works better or is workable in our city, whereas the previous assessment was this is not a good approach for our city?
Well, one thing is staff, and we actually had a lot of these conversations that I'm hearing amongst you, but the difference is, if we have no seasonal parking, we know what happens there. The streets don't get cleaned. So that's really not an option. We had the 2 to 6 ban. We knew that wasn't an option because we knew we weren't plowing then. The goal was just get you off the street once a day. Okay, but it didn't help us really with plowing. This time we said our goal is street maintenance. And so DPW goes, we concentrate on street maintenance 12 hours a day. We start at 5, and by 5 p.m. we've shut all the trucks down. So we said, let's align our seasonal ban with our maintenance, and that was the goal. We weren't trying to inconvenience anyone, but we also knew that, like I said, all night long they could park on either side of the streets until 5 a.m. If you want to adjust that, maybe till 7 a.m., they get up and move their cars. So then they don't have to scramble, like get up at 2 in the morning, move your car, 6:01, put it back where it was. We were trying to, so when DPW came in and fired those trucks up, they pretty much knew, hey, it's the first of the month. We can do the odd side today. Let's go out and do the city. Then they don't have to worry about half the city. Before they had to worry about the whole city. Now they just do half because they know the other half is being parked on. So, you see what I'm saying here? Before.
So just to jump off what you just said, I want to make
Yeah.
sure I'm understanding this
Okay.
clearly. So the expectation is on the days, the even days where you can park on the even side, they're going to plow the odd side.
Well,
the
they-
next day,
no.
they're going to plow the even side, so
No.
our streets aren't
No.
going to be completely plowed?
No.
Like-
You got to follow me here, okay? If you
Well,
never
I mean,
move
that's
your
just
car.
what it sounded like, what you
No,
just
if you
said.
never move your car, they can never plow. But if they know,
they do
let's say the
plow if you don't
odd
move
side
your
is
car.
open, they can plow those parking spaces because there'll be no cars parked there. They're going to plow all the time. But as cars move, they can do maintenance curb to curb. But it was unrealistic to say, okay, everybody be off the streets in the entire city and expect DPW to get done in 12 hours. I don't think they can do the city in 12 hours.
So both, probably not, I mean, I don't know the logistical
It's
aspects
ongoing
of that.
through months.
But
Yeah.
both driving lanes will be plowed when
Of
they're coming
course.
to the neighborhood.
We're
They're not gonna
talking-
plow
right.
one driving lane on the odd side,
No.
come back the next day and do the other side.
No, of
No,
course,
because
this
it's snowing.
is,
Yeah, I know, that's what I want to make sure. I mean, it sounded otherwise, that we're going to do half the city one day and the other half the other day.
And I
in
think the
terms
big
of
difference here too is that when we, looked at some of these other options in the past, we were always pigeonholing it into that overnight.
Yeah.
Like odd even between, 2 and whatever. This is different time frame when we're actually running the, trucks, so 5 a.m. to, 5 p.m. 'cause that's when we're actually, out and getting into the neighborhoods. There wasn't much happening at 2 a.m.
right.
That's one aspect of this that I do really like, that we're trying to align our no parking with when we actually are doing plowing.
That's
Because
cool.
it's kind of nonsense. I get the impetus for why we did the overnight ban, but it is a bit nonsensical that we're not doing any plowing during that ban. So I do like we're trying to align that, and I support that.
Yeah.
If we do move forward with this, I would prefer that window be bumped to 7 a.m. versus 5 a.m. I think that is just more of a convenient factor for our residents. I'm not, let's just move, I'm not right now, or cannot right now vote in support of this tonight. I need some more information, and we need to see which commercial districts are going to be treated differently. So in its current form, I can't, but I would like to see that change if we move forward with the 7 a.m. But presently, I can't support it, current iteration of this.
Commissioner German?
Now, is this the first time that we're actually doing this?
Yes.
Okay, so we've never done this before.
Not yet even, no.
Okay, and you basing that off the model of Grand Rapids, how they pretty much run their operation? Is that what you're doing, kind of a comparison?
That's one city that does it. I mean, there's dozens of others that do the odd and even.
Right.
Some don't do anything. It's about snow. I mean, it's how much maintenance you have.
Yeah, the goal was to make it more convenient for residents,
Yeah.
not less convenient. So even if whether it's 5 a.m. or 7 a.m. or whatever the number is, or even a little more confusing potentially up front, we think that it will be more convenient long-term for the residents, especially if they don't have a driveway or don't have off-street parking, because it'll guarantee they can at least get one day. Some of them will be hard if they're still stuck on 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., but for the most part, any residential street you live on, and you don't have a driveway, you know that you can park either, on Tuesday you drive down from the north, and on Wednesday you drive down from the south, and you park or whatever side of the street you're on. We were looking at this to be more convenient for residents. We thought that it was a step, in the right direction from a convenience standpoint. And then, and we got the same complaint that I don't know, you guys aren't complaining about it, but you're saying, but you don't even really plow between 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And people weren't buying the argument was, we just need them to move. Because if they move, they won't come back for a little while, and you will eventually get it plowed. But this really does line it up really well with the times that we are gonna plow. So it makes it more convenient for the residents, and it makes it easier for the plow truck drivers to get the street cleared curb to curb, like Chief said. But we do recognize that we have some hurdles that maybe other cities either don't have or didn't really necessarily try to accommodate. I have a feeling that in other cities that's even odd. It's just even odd. And if you have parking on no parking on one side of the street, you're just kind of, fending for yourself would be my guess. I think what we're seeing here is staff's trying to make it work for everybody the very, very best that we can. So Western would have to be treated differently. Clay, Third, a number of them have to be treated differently. It's not as simple as saying 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. But I think going back to what Commissioner Johnson said, I don't know if we thought that it wouldn't work in Muskegon a few years ago. I know Muhammad wasn't a big fan of 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. To him, I thought it was a little more worried about the complexity of implementation of it. And it was easier just to go back to something we were familiar with. And that's just what we did. We took the easy way out. This is a little more complicated, but ultimately it will be more convenient for everybody involved. Even if it takes 2 seasons to figure out exactly, where we're going on Monday versus Tuesday.
Let me add one thing too, is that winter, it was the 14 or 15, we had an unusual amount of snow. I went over to the east end of town, we had all kinds of complaints, and, that's when we had the 2 to 6 ban. There were so many streets over there that were impassable. The DPW couldn't get the trucks down through there because the ruts, the ice, it was just a cold, hard, it kept snowing over and over again. There was just no mechanism really, unless we declared a snow emergency, to get these, and I don't even know how we resolved it. I think maybe spring resolved it by melting it. But we had some major issues on the east side because these streets are so narrow. There's cars on both sides of the street. We just couldn't get them to move. We were almost paralyzed there for a couple of weeks trying to deal with this thing. And these streets, I don't even take my city car down. That's how bad they were. Because we had no mechanism, no seasonal maintenance.
Unfortunately, we have too many people that won't plow or shovel their own parking pad along their house, and they just leave it on the street, or where we've had trouble in the past is they wouldn't, shovel out their own driveway, but park on their neighbor's side of the terrace and break their underground sprinkling. And we'd have fist fights. That was one of the, I don't know if that was early on, I think in your first term, or maybe the tail end of the one before you. That's what really started presenting itself, was the damage on terraces and whatnot. Commissioner Warren?
I am all for improving what we currently do, because what we currently do doesn't sound like it's working very well. So that makes a lot of sense, and to collaborate between departments, that makes a lot of sense. I'm concerned about implementation, and I don't think that should keep us from doing it, but I don't want, even though we say, December is a warning month, I don't want residents getting all these tickets as they're trying to figure out, even, odd, all that kind of. just as a rough estimate, in the past, how often are we ticketing? You know, how many tickets would you say we actually end up passing out for because of violating the
Through the winter?
Yeah.
We started, a couple years ago, we started the warnings through December, and we actually gave out hundreds of warnings.
Okay.
But they're not tickets, they're just, that's an educational piece, See that red thing on your window, you run out, oh my gosh. Well, all it was just a warning. So that was, I think, a real good educational piece. And we used the media, of course, we used Facebook, we used Nixon, we did everything. We went to the neighborhood associations. I think the word got out pretty good. And then after that, in January and in February, we wrote a lot less tickets than we used to. I actually have the exact numbers, I think I forwarded that. We always keep track, but, I mean, we wrote, I think, last winter, 400 or 500 tickets for the 2 to 6 from January and February. But then again, we ran these tickets and we just get the cars to move once a day, you know what I mean? So, and we also go around and we tag the cars. If we see cars like deep snow on them and they haven't moved, we used to, we put stickers on them for the 48 hours because even a city street, if we don't do anything, you have to move your car every 2 days. That's a state law. And so we put those stickers on cars to move in 2 days or else. And they have to have a legal plate on the vehicle also to let it sit in the street. Can't be expired or can't be without a plate. So I think I'm not really that worried that we can't get the word out and educate because people know that we do some kind of ban and they're already calling about the 2 to 6. And that's why we've been trying to tell them that we're going to make some changes and hopefully it'll improve. And so we can do maintenance. That's our goal, not to make you move your car because we can. We want to be able to do the maintenance during that time on the whole street, and hit the parking lanes odd and even. That's what we're trying to be able to do. And ask DPW, after they plow over and over again, the center of the street, the lanes, if the cars never move, they keep packing that snow and eventually the curb lane starts coming farther out. Before you know it, it's in the travel lane, then where do you put the snow? And that's why we had that one bad winter that we're plowing against the banks of snow. There's nowhere to push it anymore,
So as far as this is the first time that without having our work session on Monday, we weren't really able to talk about this as a group and deliberate about it, so it's good to be doing this. So some of the tweaks that we've talked about, whether it's timing tweaks or whether it's certain business district tweaks, I mean, what can we expect as we're voting on it today? I mean, do you think it makes sense to bring it back next meeting with some of those tweaks, or it makes sense to flesh some of that out today, or?
Well, I think you've made about 5 recommendations that we would like to put into the plan. And also, I'd like to also address terrace parking. What do we do about that? That's the local ordinance 7. Because there's another vent for people. I think we had a conversation last year. Even we had the 2 to 6 and stuff. That means they could park basically about 18 hours a day wherever they wanted to. We still had people that had nowhere to park. So we had terrace parking that they could retreat to the terrace. But that a couple winters ago has caused an issue because it got warm in February and people tore up the terraces and they can do it in that March also. So that's another problem that comes with terrace parking is people parking up there when the frost is coming out of the ground. And there's large ruts and mud and so on and so forth. And neighbors get upset about that too. So
just to follow up, so would you be proposing that terrace parking isn't allowed during this winter ban?
Well, like I said, currently it is. If we
Right.
leave the local ordinance 7 alone, it's going
Sure.
to be allowed from December 15th to the end of February, which I think causes more confusion because the beginning and the end doesn't address that. So I'd like to align that with whatever we decide for LO9, that 7 would mirror it like it is now. Be much easier to educate. And there again, working with DPW, like our goal is maintenance, right? Our goal isn't enforcement. Our goal is safety and compliance, and we'd like to work towards that so that, we don't have to write thousands of tickets. I think we should, like Leanne just said, this is a pilot year. It's a learning year. I think we should focus on maintenance and education and implementation. And I think that, in the police department, we could do enforcement as kind of our 4th leg of this. It doesn't have to be our main goal to write violations, but to get people to understand it. And then road maintenance, to me, are important. And I know that's important to Leanne and the DPW, is the road maintenance.
So just to clarify, so you would be saying changing that ordinance for terrace parking to extend it to match these dates, so that terrace parking would be allowed
If the
from
commission would like to do that.
from December 1st through April 1st?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
okay.
we'd mirror that, the terrace would be allowed.
I would go with the shorter time frame and then not allow the terrace parking. I mean, the terrace parking causes the problem when it's melted. So if you keep it to the frozen time, you'll have less problems. If you let them park for the longer time on the terrace, you're gonna have more problems with the freeze thaw. So, and again, I feel like extending the season isn't a good idea because again, it could happen, but when it very rarely snows, it just annoys people to have to obey an ordinance that is making no common sense when there hasn't been snow for 3 weeks and, you know, it just seems silly to keep parking on one side of the street overnight or whatever you're having to do to change your routine to match this thing when the likelihood of it happening is very small. So I would advocate for keeping it short and possibly seeing if there's enough, if that creates enough on-street parking, especially for the overnight hours to get people off the terrace, I think it'd be great to get people to not do the terrace. But I honestly don't know how many people depend on that and how many spots overnight that's gonna open up on streets so that people don't need to use their terrace if they don't have a parking spot. So I'm not 100% sure that that's gonna work, but I think that might be a logical thing to try and see how it goes.
Yeah, and we also, staff figured out that if people are allowed to park at the terrace, and they do, you gotta remember, it's odd and even, right? So I'm on the odd side, and I decide to get up on the terrace, and everybody's parked on the even side, you know? I get up on the odd side terrace, so I'm legal, because I'm on the terrace, and the next day everybody retreats to my side, and I forgot to move my car, I'm parked in.
Yeah.
So residents have to be aware of that. All of a sudden I come out in the morning, oh my gosh, I'm parked in. What happened? That's because everybody moved to my side, and I stayed on the terrace. So then they'll be calling us so they can't get their car out. So there are some issues when it comes to seasonal parking, so.
If I could, you know, the terrace parking in the old program really accommodated the overnight issue, where there was no surface parking whatsoever. All right? What is, in my mind, now that there is going to be surface parking available for the overnight, there really isn't any need for the terrace parking. Daytime, good portion of the population goes to school, goes to work. I know that we have some shift workers, you know, second and, you know, third shift, et cetera. But you're not eliminating all surface parking. You just go to the other side of the street. And, you know, if you're, for those people with, you know, a parking pad, if you're taking care of that as you ought to, you know, you're gonna have your car in your garage or up along the house or whatnot. Redundancy is probably not a correct word, but, you know, I really think we have to separate how we're assessing this from our concept of the overnight 2 to whatever, when everybody has to be off of everything, and reconfigure our view of what, you know, is being proposed here for the daytime, which allows, you know, at least half the street. And, you know, why bother with the terrace parking anymore, in my mind, so.
If
Commissioner?
we have some streets, I think you mentioned that there's only parking on one side of the street.
Correct.
Would that almost force you to have terrace parking on those streets?
Yes, but we have the 2 to 6 there. I mean, that's what the current thing is. But yeah, if we change that, they can climb up on the terrace, but that's what they did before. If we eliminate the terrace parking, and we keep the 2 to 6, they couldn't park on those streets from 2 to 6.
One other, if we don't come to a decision tonight, 28th would be the next time, and you have no time to publicize which way we're going.
It's getting tighter because, I mean, like I said, our next commission meeting is at the end of November. Then we have about 5 weeks to, it would be implemented within like 7 or 8 days. And then we would have about a month of just the warnings and social media and stuff, which I think is plenty of time to get it out there. But But come January 2nd, we could go into the enforcement mode. But there again, that's not our goal. Our goal is to see how this is working, see how the maintenance thing is working, and we're gonna probably have to make some adjustments, I would think. But we gotta start out with something, some kind of core, what we're gonna do.
Or, like, in my mind, I'm thinking, what's the use of that with the terrace parking? But if we leave it as is or tweak it a little bit, we could see how things go organically, seeing as how this is a learning curve.
Right. But
Maybe just by virtue of the fact that in most areas, you're gonna, allow for the surface parking during the overnight.
I think the
Would
mayor.
just naturally go on the street as opposed to retreating to the terrace.
I think the mayor and Commissioner Johnson brought up really two good points. If you start at 7 a.m. to 5, that's a 10-hour window that they do maintenance. Most residents, if they work, because we've got to figure out too that we think that most people are moving around in the daytime, so the odd even would kind of work out because they're up and they're gone. And then, like you said, most people are gone or moving around at that time. If you start at 7 a.m. and if they have at 4:30 and go move their car, I mean, they're up and around by 7 and hopefully out the door. That'd be more convenient, more realistic for the residents, you think.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree, Chief, that we should be looking, if we're going to allow terrace parking, we should be looking to align that exception with the same time frame as the parking, winter parking ordinance, so there is less confusion there, and it should align. And I would agree with Commissioner Rithman-Stephenga that we should either stick with what we have now, the shortened period, or I would suggest maybe it's even easier to communicate and to understand is December 1st through March 1st rather than December 15th is the last day of February, which can change, with the 28th or the 29th. Just to be clear, I'd say December 1st to March 1st, those are the 3 months that are considered meteorological winter, it was December, January, February. So having that aligned with that, I think would be a good idea. With regard to terrace parking, since we aren't going, for those streets that only have parking on one side already, we do have to figure out a way to make an exception. I don't know how you're gonna craft that ordinance, or if it's just a matter of discretionary enforcement, I don't know. That's for our legal counsel and director to hammer out how that could be navigable. But it would need to happen. I mean, like for instance, my street, it's just one side, and if you don't allow them terrace parking, they have no place to park. There isn't any public parking in the area, and unfortunately, my my neighbors would be SOL. So I don't want to leave them in that situation. So we need to figure that out for sure. Oh, and just to note in terms of when this goes in enforcement, because Commissioner Turnquist mentioned November 27th is our next meeting. So if we were to vote on this till the 27th and wanting it to be enforced in December, we would have to approve it unanimously on November 27th. So it negates a second reading in December. If that's the intent, is to get this on the books at the beginning of December, or as close as possible to the beginning of December. Either we'd have to vote on it tonight and do a second reading at the end of November, or just get a unanimous reading, unanimous approval at the end of November. And right now, like I said, I can't support its current iteration.
It seems like we need a little bit of time to make the adjustments that the commissioners talked about. And we could have, we would have tried to make those between yesterday and today, but we didn't get yesterday. But I think we can make those and have a good, we could have a solid, adoptable draft for that meeting. And really, if we're aiming for implementation and, if we decide with December 15th through the end of February, even if it does take 2 readings, we can start educating people in December by giving them notes on the same warning signs. We can start grabbing their attention in anticipation of it being adopted on the second reading.
Commissioner Warren?
Would you feel comfortable if we amended the motion to acknowledge the changes that we've gone over as a group today? That those would be too complicated?
Yeah, probably. I mean, if we're gonna go line by line by line each item, that'd probably be too complicated right now. I'm guessing. I mean, unless we wanna really all try to hash that out.
Yeah, I think it'd be easier for us to do it.
Okay, so, we have the motion, where do we go to?
I move we table the motion to the November 27th meeting.
Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Rinzima-Savinga, supported by, who did that? The Vice Mayor, to
Point
table,
of clarification,
pardon me?
given that we're gonna be getting changes to this, should we just withdraw the original motion or vote it down so that a updated ordinance can be presented at the November 27th meeting versus just tabling the current motion and the current proposed ordinance?
Table and then bring forward an amended motion or withdraw now, either.
Okay.
So we're tabling to bring forth a amended document. And as it's being tabled, there's, no discussion. I got the second, right? But we have to vote on that. We're voting on the tabling, right?
Okay. Commissioner German,
Yes.
Commissioner Rinzima-Siviga.
Yes.
Commissioner Turnquist,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Mayor Gowron,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Warren,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you. New business, item C, short-term rental discussion, city manager.
Yeah, so we're, Jeff and I'll probably tag team this one, and this isn't one we're looking for decision on today, but more guidance to make sure that we're on the right, path. This is another topic that we wanted to cover in a work session, but we still wanted to get it in front of the commission, as soon as possible. If you recall, about a year ago, we kind of started down this path with the discussion of registering vacation rentals and regulating vacation rentals. And we just decided to kind of sit on it, for the season, after we had a number of owners and operators come to the meeting. I will say that over the last, season, we've received, I would say, more complaints than we had in previous years, at least in my time here, especially as the vacation rentals have kind of migrated away from more than just being, in and around Pure Marquette Park. They're turning up in Beechwood, the Beechwood portion of the neighborhood. So we are hearing from the neighbors that do want us to do something. We've heard from neighbors everything from outright ban them down to regulate them. And we think the smart thing to do is acknowledge that they do play an important role in our ecosystem as a beachfront community, but also make sure that they are being regulated in a way that they don't detract from the neighborhood. They already do create good things in the neighborhood, and then they create voids in our neighborhood, and you can see them as simple as, trick-or-treaters on Halloween. In the Beechwood Bluffton neighborhood, half the houses are empty, because the families aren't there. They're gone back to their regular house. You had people like Jeff Lewis, for example, that have a different neighbor every week.
About 12 neighbors this summer.
Yeah, 12 different neighbors this summer. But there are things that we think make a whole lot of sense to regulate in terms of how many people should be occupying a structure at a time. If it's a one-bedroom structure and they're renting it out for, 15, visitors, is that appropriate or not appropriate? And so we think that we have a draft ordinance that we want to give the commissioners to take home and read and spend some time understanding. But we think it puts us in a good spot to be able to better regulate this type of business use, particularly within those neighborhoods. Beechwood, Bluffton, we're seeing them in Lakeside, and we're seeing them in NIMS a little bit, and we'll probably more and more we'll start to see them in the downtown neighborhoods as the downtown gets more popular as a tourist attraction. Oh, sorry.
Commissioner?
So it says here that the fee is gonna be set by a resolution of the city commission from time to time. I'm guessing that's one of the biggest things people care about is how much is it gonna cost?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that this is set, not an ordinance, but when you do your fee your fee structure every year, so you'd have the opportunity to change it, you know, from year to year if it needed to be raised or not. We've gone back and forth at a staff level. If you remember last year, I think we talked about $500 for the year. I think we're still kind of in that range. We've been kind of looking at anywhere between $300 and $500 for the year. But again, we fully expect to go in and inspect, and there are a number of things that maybe Jeff can talk about what we'll expect to be able to do with that $500 we'll pay for. But the goal is really more about registration and compliance than it is about revenue generation. But we do want to make sure that the program itself is self-sustaining, much like we make the rental registration program self-sustaining, so that, you know, property owners and Jackson Hole neighborhood aren't paying the cost of vacation rentals program in Beechwood or Bluffton.
So currently, short-term rental people don't need a rental registration
They
through the
just-
current program?
They use a regular rental registration, correct, Chief?
If they register, they would come in and get just a regular rental registration. Yes,
That's what they should be doing.
that's what they should be doing. But we think we're missing a majority of them are not doing that. Because they're hard to identify, because an annual rental or a month-to-month rental, that's all year long.
Yeah.
And usually the neighbors, everything's copacetic, but if someone just abandons their house for like 3 weekends and does it,
Yeah.
by the time we find out about it, we don't find out about it. I mean, because it comes and goes too quickly. But we've discovered, and let's just go out to Beechwood Bluffton, for example. We all know now that many of those houses out there, we had a company identify just about 100 in our city that are doing I don't want to label Airbnb, because what it is, it's called a short-term rental, because there's many, many companies out there. Key Away, Home Away, Airbnb, whatever. And they go on these sites and they advertise rentals. But the problem is the people come in and they rent the house for $1,000 a week or whatever. Well, they're not paying the hotel tax because they're what they call short-term rental, 29 days or less. They're required by law to pay the hotel tax. Some of them are not. When you start renting your house out, it affects your homestead exemption. So as the state picks up on that could affect that, which our ordinance will cover. There's other things that you have to understand when you start renting them out, what you have to do. Some people aren't doing anything, just renting their house out, collecting the money, and that's it. And we'd like to see, we saw the problems with these short-term rentals. As an example, somebody rents it to the rowing team from Japan, for instance. 30 people come in, they use a 3-bedroom house, there's 30 people in this house for a week, it's total chaos. In our ordinance, we're gonna have an occupancy. If someone wants to do this, they have to come down and get what they call a short-term rental. They'll have the home inspected, they'll have to put that they've been registered inside the home so that the tenants can see that. And then it will basically give them a guidance on how many people are legitimately, like an occupancy, like we have with bars and other places. You have a legitimate occupancy where that many people can be in there. So we don't have 30 people in a house causing complete chaos in the neighborhood, which has happened out at the beach. We had that occurring. We try to nip that in the bud. There's a variety of things people do. They'll rent the house, bring their 10 people, and then next thing you know, a trailer pulls up, a camper, 30-foot camper. They plug that into the house, they got 10 more people in their RV in the driveway. We're gonna prohibit that. They can't have a trailer along with the house there, which increases the occupancy by a large number. I have a list of about 14 things we sent our attorney that we had noticed was occurring with the short-term rentals, because they're vacation rentals. You know, a couple days, 5 days, a week, or 2 weeks. People are there short-term, they have a good time, and they leave. And the next one's coming, the next one's coming, the next one comes. So we're trying to put something in place for that.
Commissioner
We have
Charquist?
no, regulation on the length of the rental, it can be just one night.
Well, this will address it. It's actually like, you know, like a hotel, 1 day or more up to 29, and that would be called a short-term rental. 1 to like less than 30.
So it allows one night.
Right. And we even talked about mixed. There might be people that go, okay, I'm going to be a short-term rental for 3 months, and I'm going to go back to doing month-to-month or annual. They'd have to get a rental registration and a short-term to do this, what we call mixed rental, because they're doing 2 different things there.
Commissioner Moore?
We had talked about, when we talked about this a year ago, the safety implications of making sure that things are up to code and the occupancy and all of that.
Yeah.
So is this being proposed as a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year? How often would that cycle be happening with including inspections or occupancy, those kind of things?
We talked about that. There again, about 2 months ago, the commission approved a new rental ordinance. The amendment. We're trying to write this similar, so if you have a person that's complying, they would have less inspections than the one that isn't. Similar to that, we haven't got to those nuts and bolts yet, how that will happen internally here. But we will, like, once again, reward that person that is doing things properly to have less inspections. But remember, when it's complaint-driven, then we're back there anyway. So if we get a complaint on a location, that will get us back to that house to inspect. And right now, we don't really have a mechanism to do that. And then what's happening too with inspections is a lot of these complaints come in after hours and on weekends when our inspections departments aren't working. We're an annual or a month-to-month rental. Those complaints come in, but the people are there for a long period of time. And for instance, we'll have to train our police and fire staff because they're going to be responding to understand what this ordinance is, the short term, and for them to take action maybe on a Saturday night, that we can do things then, because if we wait till Monday or Tuesday, the person could be long gone by then, and the complaint could just roll on and on and on. And the neighbors that live there, the residents, get no kind of relief because our inspections department isn't working. So this would be a concerted effort between inspections, police, and fire to, oversee this regulation.
So with the current system, in that situation you just described, is inspections then working with the owner, whoever is renting out the property?
Yes.
Instead of,
Obviously, the owner would have to come in and register as a short-term rental. They would read this ordinance, they'd work with our inspections department to comply with the ordinance, answer their questions, so on and so forth, and then they'd be permitted to then do the short-term rentals.
Commissioner Johnson?
You mentioned that you're looking at modeling that short-term rental regulations on, and the inspection system on how to reach inspections. Will that also be required?
That's in this ordinance.
Okay.
And it will be
I haven't read
posted.
it yet, we just got it.
Yeah, I know,
at this
that's what I'm trying
meeting,
to help you
so,
out.
okay.
It's in the ordinance, it'll be posted, so if first responder comes there on Saturday night, they'll know to look on the back of the door and see what the criteria is for that rental, and they'll have all that information available to them. So if it's a situation that's to be remedied right then, they have the information available to them.
Okay.
That's important, because they're getting, the annuals aren't that, they're important, but they're not, you have to post everything there, because generally registered, long-term tenants, they have a lease, so on and so forth. It's the short term that come and go so quickly, we can't get a handle on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, are we looking at regulating the number of short-term rentals within a neighborhood or any kind of geographic area, so that we don't have the potential where the majority of our neighborhood suddenly is no longer residents, but just transient, renters, that seasonal renters that might be there a day, a week, and it's just a continuous turnover, that impacts the quality of life in our neighborhoods and for our residents. And so, just wondering, are we looking at trying to regulate the number of these so that entire neighborhoods don't get taken over with just short-term rentals? And is that in our legal purview to do? Regulate how many or what percentage?
I don't know if we've seen places limit by the number. They limit them by the area. They allow them or don't allow them. I think one of the limiting factors will be as we get more strict with the rules, as they can't take a 2-bedroom house and make as much money as they can make by renting out to 15 people, and they're constantly having to do it to a 4-person family or a 5-person family. I think as we make it more difficult to make the easy money, it won't be the thing that automatically happens whenever a house comes for sale in a neighborhood. I think for the longest time it was, the best investment for a lot of those houses throughout Beechwood or throughout Bluffton. They were pretty cheap to get a hold of if you had cash and you didn't have to do a lot to them, and all of a sudden you could rent them out and make $1,500 a week. I think if we don't want to make it so people they're not profitable. I think as property values go up and restrictions get more tight and rental registration fees become a reality, it won't be quite as easy of a solution for somebody to kind of go buy a house on the side and just think they're gonna make a bunch of money with it. Which is really what we've seen. You know, I live in that neighborhood now, and a lot of times you never even know when a house comes for sale. One of the neighbors buys it, turns it into a rental very quickly, before it's even for sale. Mostly to control, in my opinion, to control their neighbors, but a lot of times they very quickly become rentals that way. I think they'll think twice if it's a $500 fee every year, if they thought they were gonna lease it out to 10 families a night, and it turns out they're gonna do 6. There's a different rate they can get for that as a rental. I think that we can do some things that'll make it less desirable for a whole neighborhood to become it, and almost less sustainable for a neighborhood to be full of them, even with Lake Michigan across the street. It just won't be quite as profitable, and that'll help them become homes again. Because you're right, I mean, much of Beechwood has become that a lot. I mean, Bluffton has become that, and Beechwood could too.
Commissioner?
I think some of it depends on the market, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to fight the market for that. I mean, I think Beechwood Bluffton is still not as popular as Grand Haven or Saugatuck or other places, even in West Michigan. Not even talking about other places in other states, like, I know Bradenton Beach in Florida I've been to. I mean, if you're along the water, every house is going to be a vacation rental. There's just no way to buy a house, and unless you're very wealthy, and then do you really want to buy a house in basically a commercial district that's vacation rental? So I think the market depends a lot on it. So I think that, you know, Beechwood Bluffton is not going to, I would be very surprised, because I think that these have flourished in other areas where there's basically, you know, more concentration of tourists. Muskegon's very spread out, and so I think I would be surprised if you see it. It just depends on the market. If the market is that way, maybe it would, but I don't know how you can fight against it by saying, well, only a certain amount in a certain area. I think that'd be very difficult.
And Commissioner, to kind of answer your question, this is not inclusive just to Muskegon. That there's a lot of discussion going on up and down the lake shore about this and statewide. And I'm sure the attorney can give us some, at some point down the road, give us some advice on this, because the state of Michigan is looking at this also as communities have prohibited it. The state is thinking about writing a law that we can't prohibit it. And so those are all the talks I'm hearing. This is just nothing in stone yet. So we felt it was best to, we saw that there should be a time that we are not trying to stop it, we're just trying to regulate it, because we're seeing issues in our neighborhoods. Me being a resident, I'm not opposed to the rentals, but I do see problems with no regulation. And if you read this ordinance, there's about 5 things we're focusing on. It's our ordinance, the trash that we see, the wreck fires, there's a couple other listed there. That would be our
Occupancy.
focus, because those are really nuisance for residents. And if those rentals were operating like the rest of the neighborhood, they wouldn't be a problem. So there needs to be some regulation there. That's why we're doing this, not to ban it or prohibit it, you know, or even limit it like we talked about here. We just want some regulation for this, once again, safety and compliance, because I live it, I see what's going on. It needs some attention.
Absolutely. It's not about banning it outright, nor is it about unmitigated free market, you know, ruling. It's having reasonable regulations. I think that's what we're attempting to do here, not only for the safety of the people that are renting, but also the surrounding neighbors, and helping to ensure that the permanent residents have a good quality of life and aren't suffering from constant nuisances. So I think this is a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
Because it is spreading, you know, up off the lake. I mean, we had 4 residents, you know, up towards Country Club with a pretty negative, you know, experience with 100 people on the motorhome,
Right.
whatever else. I know, but I think, you know, but we do have, we do have benefit of our sister communities up and down the shoreline to, you know, see where this is going regionally. But in the community I work in, to the south of us, I've seen probably close to 4 square blocks turn into a resort, you know, adjacent to the downtown. I don't think there's that many people that live downtown anymore because it's all turning into, you know, vacation, you know, rentals, and I don't know what they do in the off season. It's, I know that they put a moratorium on expansion at one point, so they could wrap their head around, you know, the results of its incursion on the adjacent, you know, residential neighborhoods. So, ain't an easy one, but what's easy enough is to admit the fact that it needs to be regulated well for the sake of the full-time residents and, you know, everybody else that's involved, health and safety of visitors.
Absolutely.
So, where do we go from here with this? Continue to work on it? How will it be presented?
So if we think that there's reasonable interest in it, we'd like to set up a work session and do a little bit of outreach and see if we can get some folks from those, you know, from those particular impacted neighborhoods in here to give us their input on it. I did speak with a number of them from Beechwood about some concerns that they had, and I encouraged them, you know, when this comes up, that they should come and talk about some of the problems that they've had. So that, you know, last time we were here, we pretty much only heard from the owners of the properties. Every one of those people indicated that they would like to come and at least have an opportunity to talk about the importance of regulating them to some level in and around their neighborhoods. So if we could do that at the either at the December or January work session would be nice, because if we're going to have, you know, if we're going to have requirements, we're going to want to get these out to the property owners. You know, a lot of them are probably already booking dates for the 2019 season, so we're going to want to get with them as soon as possible and try to understand how we deal with a property that we expect should have occupancy level of X, and they're already leasing it out with an occupancy level of Y. So just have to try to, the sooner the better I guess is what I'm getting at. But if we think there's a stomach to get it on the December work session, then we'll get it on the December work session and hear from them.
Okay. So yeah, you know, the affected residents, because when we did float the idea of a registration fee, basically the only people that did show up were the owners, a number who don't necessarily live right in the city. And we were highly berated about our crappy little town where there was no development or any good things happening. And they were the goose that laid the golden egg, which I took some exception to, seeing as how those of us that do live here are working extremely hard, and there are good things, you know, happening. And I took exception with their view and their presentation of our fine city and the hard work that's being done and the good things that are happening. Anyway, be prepared. Be prepared.
I don't think we'll see a reprise of that goose and golden egg skit that they did because the woman sold her rental property. So I don't think we'll see that again.
Oh,
Well, she might have sold the eggs too.
I liked that. So we can expect this for the December work session.
Yes.
very good.
And, sorry, another follow-up question. Is this available anywhere for residents or?
We can make it available. It's not right now, but we can make it available.
With a big thing across draft.
Draft,
Yes.
yeah, when you
Yes.
do that watermark.
Please.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on short-term rental? All right, see you in December. Item D, please. Thank you, Chief.
Disposition of 1021 Jefferson, City Manager. Summary of request. Staff has received multiple purchase offers and development proposals for the city-owned employee parking lot on the corner of Apple and Jefferson. Staff is seeking permission to execute a letter of intent to sell 1021 Jefferson Street to General Capital in anticipation of constructing a 73-unit housing development focused on providing quality workforce housing. Staff recommends approval of the request.
So I can just give a quick run into,
We-
oh, you need it.
Yeah, I'll need a motion. Commissioner Johnson.
I move to execute a letter of intent to sell 1021 Jefferson Street to General Capital. Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Johnson, supported by Commissioner Enzima to approve the request and execute a letter of intent to sell 1021 Jefferson Street to General Capital. Discussion, Commissioner Turnquist?
I have a couple of questions. That's the employee lot that's diagonal to City Hall.
Yes.
How would you replace that for where our employees are going to park? Would it be just convenient? The alternatives that you have, and I know it's a mixed kind of a thing on rental. I'm reluctant to have some more income control buildings in our community, although the Berkshire building, it's beautiful and certainly is an asset to the city. The question is, will there be taxable income coming off of this kind of project?
Yep. So to answer your first question, we think that there are parking opportunities adjacent to City Hall, and we are seeking those out right now. We're reaching out to the Catholic Church, and we're reaching out to we're going to reach out to Fifth Third, who has a large parking lot that's underutilized. But there are a number of underutilized parking lots, I guess, as you go further towards Western Avenue. But also, we think there are some opportunities where we can add additional on-street parking and accommodate most of the workforce. So the parking lot, I'm sure at one point there was a reason why it was that large, but if you look at it nowadays, it's very much. I don't know that we use even quite 40% of it on a typical day. So I don't think we have to replace that whole parking lot's size in the downtown. I know that there's at least been some discussions too with the potential developer of some co-location of parking on that site where we could still maybe utilize some spaces.
You feel the parking as close as that lot is, but in smaller pieces?
Yeah, exactly. I think, for example, if we can work out a deal with the church, I mean, it's essentially the same distance, maybe a half of a block further, and they'll come in a different door. But we might see a focus on which door people walk in. Right now, people cross the street there and they come in the police entrance, or they come in the Walton entrance. If they were if they parked at the other lot, they would probably come in by the clerk's office, or they probably would almost exclusively come in the clerk's office. That would probably be the most efficient location. But yeah, I think we'll find that parking isn't really an issue. As a matter of fact, I know it's probably still temporary, but I think more people park in the McDonald's parking lot right now. You know, they park in the drive-through. They pretty much park anywhere they can park over there.
But there's some good hope for that property.
Yeah, and there's some hope that gets developed too. We looked at the City Hall property itself, and there's probably some opportunities where we could, work in a few more spaces, where the police parking lot is, and maybe combine the parking lots together. And I know Public Works is looking at, how we accommodate more people on site. So that's still to be determined, but also we think that there's some opportunities as we reimagine, like TERRACE, for example, where TERRACE could move to more angle parking, and we can double the amount of spaces along TERRACE. But the short answer is we think that parking losing this won't be detrimental to city staff. There should still be plenty of parking nearby. I guess to move on to the second question about the income restricted nature of the development, I would say this would be the first one that I know of in Muskegon that we've done under the new HUD guidelines. I think that allow up to 80% of AMI. Most of what we've seen, like the Amazon used to be, and a number of them are now, they're at 60% area median income. And one spot where we've missed is the ability for people that make just above that 60% level, but still are making below the area median income. And so what was really intriguing to staff on this one is that almost 40% of the units are earmarked for 80% of the area median income. I think that creates some development hurdles for the developer to push through, because I think the average still has to be at 60% or below. So for every 80% unit they add, they have to add other units below 60% to kind of offset the total income restriction at the site. But I think adding these 80% AMI units will be one of the biggest pieces that we've been missing in and around our downtown. And I sent over some examples of what income that could be based on our income levels, and really they're not, in the grand scheme of things, they're not low incomes for what we expect here in Muskegon. I think the example I used were a single parent with 2 kids, so 3 dependents making something like $19 an hour could still be qualified for that particular unit over there. And I think you would find that a lot of the people that live right now or work in Muskegon at a factory job or things like that are making in or around or below that amount as it is. So I think it gives a good opportunity for people to still be able to afford to live downtown and live in the Nelson neighborhood, especially as housing prices are rising pretty rapidly. And as we're seeing the new developments that are going in closer to Western Avenue, they're coming in with rental rates at, $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month that aren't really affordable for many people. And this will be a way to make sure that the downtown doesn't quite get too segregated or too off limits to people with more modest incomes.
Any taxable income from the property?
Yeah, well, the people who live there, obviously will still pay income taxes. The proposal in the agreement is also what you call a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes equal to 10%. I'm assuming that there's some wiggle room in there for some of it being city service fee versus some of it being pilot. But I think I did the math on it, and it was something like $43,000 to $48,000 a year, we think, assuming that it was occupied at about 85% capacity. So there will be taxes generated, or the equivalent of taxes generated. There will be people generated, into the downtown or the neighborhoods, which will generate income taxes. So there will be some level of financial gain by the city, aside from just the sale of the property, the 400.
Commercial stuff too.
Yep. What we liked specifically about this particular development was that they were including a commercial component, specifically along the Apple Avenue side. So there's some office space there, there's some commercial space, and then I think there's a little bit of community space for the residents that live there as well too. So it kind of carries that mixed use development component a little bit further into the neighborhood. And I think that you might find that could be very beneficial with what they build there, because on that little corner that surrounds that property, we have Jefferson Towers and we have the Hamilton Apartments, and then we would have this, there'd be, upwards of 200 apartment units, and that, on those 3 corners there, that would be Jefferson and Hamilton in that corner. And so there's becomes more and more of a need to begin providing, things like, maybe not grocery level type of stuff, but retail option for the people that live there, neighborhood convenience items, so to speak. And then enough residents there to support it is also a really important component too.
Is the 455,000 market value?
I would say it's very generous. If you compare
On their part or our part?
I would say that on their part, it's very generous. If you compare it to what we've seen land sell for closer to the water, I would think that, and we didn't get an appraisal done when we did this, but I think we would probably find that it would appraise somewhere less than $455,000 if we were to get an appraisal for it in its current state.
I don't consider that close to the water.
I guess that's what I'm getting at. When you look closer to the water, we've seen them, sell for about $300,000 an acre, for for the more valuable land. And I think that's about 1.5 acres or somewhere around there. So I would say the sale price is very similar to what we're seeing closer to the waterfront, and closer to the core of the downtown. Which is a good thing for us that this company in particular saw the value in it. But if you look at what the other two proposals offered, which was, one was $100,000 and one was, I think, $400,000. Two of them obviously saw more value in the land, significantly more value in the land than the first. I think Dave raised his hand, but I don't get to call people.
Commissioner, that is a higher rate than you're getting, or even listing some of the DMDC property in Muskegon.
Higher rate.
Higher
Higher.
rate. You're getting per acre higher rate than we are seeing. I know that we've done some sales.
You'll have approximately 75 units in there, 74 units.
Yeah, 77, was it 77, 73? 73 units.
Anything else from this side? Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, it's a good selling price, so let's make it happen. Now, quick before they change their mind.
Is that it?
No.
Okay. Roll call.
I don't have too much. I don't really have much misgivings that it is all income controlled or restricted housing. I know that there's some sentiment or feeling that maybe our urban core is oversaturated with low-income housing as a result of our city being more accommodating than many other municipalities in allowing those kind of developments. But we have been very motivated to get market rate apartments and residential options in the core downtown area. But we shouldn't be doing that necessarily to the detriment of even considering income constrained or income controlled housing. And we already have General Capital has a proven track record in our downtown. Did a very, very nice job with the Berkshire, and it's 100% occupied, and that was predominantly low income. I was very happy that they did accommodate some market rate apartments in that building as well as commercial. So I do like that they're considering mixed use for this as well with commercial space and the underground parking. I love any facility that's got underground parking in our city. So I am supportive of this. I do have one, especially the purchase price. I do wonder this. So we said we received multiple proposals. Did we put out an official RFP for this? Did we just list the property for sale? Or how did we go about getting three different proposals on
Well,
this
we
property?
didn't. No, we didn't put out an RFP. What happened was we had a number of syndicated, I guess, I don't know what term they use, but they're developers specifically looking for spaces to do income restricted developments. And typically they come to the city and they say, hey, we're looking for a place to do this, and they were having trouble finding places to do it. And all three of them, we said that maybe there was an opportunity for our Jefferson Street parking lot, mostly because they're very limited on where they can be. There's new requirements for walking scores and stuff like that, have to be at a certain level, and that's one of the things that's going to really, I don't want to say force these things into downtown Muskegon, but it'll make downtown Muskegon much more likely to be desirable for the developers, because you can't put it out on Grand Haven Road or places where people can't walk to get their daily needs satisfied. And so we had a number of them that were coming to us and saying, okay, where should we be looking for this? And as we looked around the downtown, it was very clear that we weren't going to be able to get sales done, in places like DMDC properties on Western Avenue, and then areas out on Clay weren't walkable enough. And really, when we started to search down on the properties that were available, or at least didn't have buildings on them and could be used, there really weren't that many. And so we proposed this to one of them, and when one of them said he was going to give us a proposal on it, we thought that the smart thing to do was to also ask the other two to do a similar thing, to essentially give us proposals for it as well. So we took the three developers that were specifically looking in Muskegon at the time for somewhere to place income restricted LIHTC development, and we asked all of them to consider putting a bid or a proposal together for this project, for the site, and all three of them did. All three of them liked the location. All three of them, submitted proposals, and this particular one rose to the top. If you saw in there, I had the the information on the other two. One of them was a senior-focused one, and another one was very similar to the Berkshire, but it had less units and a lower asking price on the property. And we didn't really have a relationship with them to know what their track record was, at least in West Michigan. And so Berkshire, or General Capital, I should say, kind of stood out amongst the other ones. So, no, we weren't even really actively trying to get rid of a parking lot. It was more along the lines of, okay, let's put our heads together and try to accommodate affordable housing in the downtown, and what area makes a lot of sense where we can accommodate that. And this was the area that kind of rose to the top. We just happened to be in control of it. If we weren't in control of it, we would have pushed them to the right people. There was another lot that they were a couple of them were interested in, that the county owns over there behind the courthouse. And for whatever reason, Jonathan couldn't seal the deal with them over there, and they came back to us for this particular one. We pushed them there first. That was kind of option number one, and when that didn't work out for whatever reason, all three became interested in this property again.
Okay. We did have a quasi RFP or semi-formal
Some
RFP
modified RFP.
for this, okay. Yeah, I think this is a good fit, good project. It will help ensure that we help promote socioeconomic diversity in our revitalizing downtown, which I think is important to have to foster a dynamic and vibrant downtown. Yeah. So, thank you, I'm supportive.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Turnquist,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Mayor Gowron,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Warren,
Yes.
Commissioner German,
Yes.
Commissioner Rinsma Sivinga.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So when the shovels go on the ground there, Josh?
End of this year, hopefully.
Oh,
I'm sorry, end of next year.
okay.
We're really excited to get this one going.
I didn't mean to spook you. Okay, thank you. Best of luck. Item E under new business, please.
Letter of intent with MartDoc, City Manager, Summary of Request. Staff is seeking permission to enter into a letter of intent with MartDoc with the goal of determining the feasibility of swapping their property commonly referred to as the 3rd Street Dock with our property commonly referred to as Fisherman's Landing. The goal of swap would be to relocate all of the MartDoc's shipping operations away from their downtown location to the city property adjacent to the BC Cobb site. The downtown site would be redeveloped into a mixture of public space, residential, and commercial uses. This agreement does not commit either party to the swap, but rather gives both parties time and access to study the feasibility of the complicated transaction. Staff recommendation, staff recommends approval of the request.
Commissioner Rinsma Savinga?
I move we approve the request to enter into a letter of intent with MartDoc.
Support.
It's been moved by Commissioner Rinsma Savinga, supported by Commissioner Warren, to enter into a letter of intent with the MartDoc. You leading out on this, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think I've updated most of the commissioners on this. I've at least had conversations at one point or another on this one. I think everybody understands what we're trying to accomplish here, but the goal is kind of, I think it's been a long-standing goal, I think, of the community to get that port activity moved a little bit further east. And there's really only one property that we control that, where we can kind of assist with that, and that's the Fisherman's Landing site. We know that there are a lot of moving pieces to this. Complicated probably is, not even a complicated enough word to talk about how this, how it's going to work to get this done. But I think for the future of the downtown and future of the Muskegon Lake waterfront, even getting to this point to being able to get on each other's property and see if it's feasible to make the swap, I think that's a big step forward that a lot of people probably thought we wouldn't be able to sit here and talk about. So I think it's exciting from a development standpoint. The letter of intent's, pretty clear. None of us are obligated to finish the deal if it doesn't make sense for either side. But there's really only one way to find out if it makes sense, and that's sign the letter and get to work on it. I'm not sure what a good timeline is. I think for us, it's less complicated to take a look at the land and do the phase one and stuff like that on theirs. I think on the Mardock side, it's probably a little more complicated because they really need to understand, what it's gonna cost to make that Fisherman's Landing site work as a port facility, and there's a lot more into that, than what we're gonna have to figure out. So I think the timeline is gonna be, more driven by the folks at the Mardock than by the city. We'll get on it right away and try to understand what we need to do and what makes sense for us. But I think that they're gonna need a little bit of time to understand, what kind of work's gonna do and if it's gonna be feasible for them to relocate their activity over there.
Commissioner Turnquist?
Yeah, I have some reservations about this. The comparison in size of the property that we're talking about compared to Fisherman's Landing, it's going to create a problem, and I know we've talked about it, and we have some other options on the table possibly, but that's the only RV park that we have in the area. And if any of you have never been down to Fisherman's Landing where the RV park is, that's probably one of the most beautiful areas to look at Muskegon Lake. The scenery is just gorgeous. And to trade that piece of property for what I'd look to see is a small piece of property, unless you can tell me that they're more equal and what our potential. We have a drawing here about with the red and the green of what was going to mix usage and so forth. But I think there's a lot of work to be done to give up Fisherman's Landing, even though I'm in agreement of the industry going down at that end of the lake. That's a beautiful piece of property.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely, like I said, it's complicated and it's a heavy lift, and it's, the agreement as it's written, kind of indicates that at some point we might find out that one of the properties is more valuable than the others, and other things might have to be considered as, to make the transaction make sense for both sides. So for example, if, Fisherman's Landing's worth $2 or $3 million, and for some reason the value that we're going to receive from the Mardock is half of that, then we'll have to have that conversation with them to see how we make up the difference in value. And I believe they're open to having that conversation and in a number of different ways, is what I understand, whether it's cash or other considerations, which is a good thing. But I think until we kind of ferret out all the details and understand maybe what could happen to Fisherman's Landing and where could it be and stuff like that, I would say that we really don't know what we might find a better location that's got even better view for you, for Fisherman's Landing, or at least something that's got, and it might not be at this particular location that we're swapping. And I actually think the intent is that it's not this particular location, but that it could be some other place on the waterfront as well.
I would just like to see Mardock and Sam Products have done a lot for this community. Max has been very generous, but I'd like to see them sweeten the pot.
You hear that, Max? We gotta let him start talking. But you hear that, Max?
Very quiet.
Any other comments, views? Commissioner Johnson?
So, according to what was presented, the original letter from Mardock, only considering the L-shaped portion of that Third Street property as a potential swap. Why not the entirety of that property there? Why? And what discussions have you had? And does the city want all of that property at the end of Third Street there on the waterfront?
I think we want to ensure, and I'll let Mardock folks speak on their own behalf, but I think from our standpoint, we want to ensure that there is mixed-use development on there. And, if it comes all to us as one piece, I think there maybe is some concern that it ends up being all recreation-based and not necessarily include the commercial and residential development that we all think needs to happen there. I think the goal here is to get in our hands the waterfront access that would be the park space, and let the professional developers essentially develop the commercial and retail space, and residential space. And for them, and correct me, they can correct me if I'm wrong, I think they would really like to ensure that it's cohesive with development that they would ultimately do, on the remainder of their property. And not, so we don't do something that doesn't fit in, with what they're ultimately gonna do on the rest of Mart Dock.
So why would it sound like if we were to take over all of it, there's the prospect of it all becoming recreational? What would preclude us? I mean, if we were to take it over, we would be able to still have an L-shaped that's recreational and the rest mixed use. Like, there's nothing to preclude us, right?
Nothing to preclude us, no.
Okay, but they're interested in doing mixed-use development on the remaining property. So basically, the onus would be on them, but we're just preserving, we're creating new public space accommodations on our waterfront.
Exactly. We're trying to ensure that as part of the losing what's at Fisherman's Landing now, that there becomes better public waterfront access downtown, which we've heard from a lot of folks that that's one thing that they feel is missing. And while we might feel like we're losing 20 or 30 acres of campground space, it's really not accessible nor used by all the people of Muskegon, whereas something like this that might be less acreage would attract and benefit far more people and far more visitors on a, on a day-to-day basis, just because of the high-quality location of the
Yeah, absolutely.
of the recreational space. So recreationally, it probably has more value to us. On an appraisal standpoint, just land value, maybe it does not. But from a recreational standpoint, it would probably have more value to us than Fisherman's Landing, just because of the location.
I think it will help, particularly if we're able to get transient or merchant slips, transient commercial docks, so that people can come up in their boats and come into our downtown. I think that will be helpful to further connect our waterfront with our downtown core, which has been a long time goal and vision of ours. That's why I'm particularly excited about the prospect of Watermark's overall operations potentially moving to the east end of our lake, so that we can get that redeveloped. Or Mart Dock, what did I say? Watermark? Oh, goodness.
That's another story.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Mart Dock, the prospect of that. Now, I know that moving all of their operations is not part of this deal. That's just helping to facilitate that in the future. But I think that prospect is particularly exciting, so that we can get that mixed-use development at the Mart Dock property.
One thing to note, though, until they move their operations over there, the campground would be maintained. So if for some reason it took 1 year, or if it took 10 years, there's a chance that that campground would be maintained in operation as a recreational resource for the community.
Yeah.
Until the operations were relocated.
Yeah, I did like that, and appreciate that Mart Dock is willing to make that accommodation for the campers and the users of that in the meantime that it gets developed. So what's going to happen? Eventually Fisherman's Landing is going to close. I'm not talking about where we're going to reload camping, but it's really important that we have boat ramp access on the east end of our lake for our residents. We don't want to deprive our residents in Jackson Hill or an Angel or Marquette of having a boat ramp access in close proximity to where they live. And we don't want these all to be primarily located on the west end of our city. So it's really important to me and others on this commission that we still have some kind of access on the east end. What are we going to do if this does go forward? And is this going to be part of our due diligence, making sure that we find a location, whether it's the same property or elsewhere on the east end, that we're going to be able to accommodate boat ramp and access?
Yeah, and it will be part of our due diligence. I think we found that last time we considered swapping Fisherman's Landing out for something else a few years ago, that the DNR was adamant that that we needed to be able to demonstrate to them that there was still boat launch access on the east side of the lake. I don't think those necessarily had to be in the city limits, and there are some other ones that are like, say, just outside the city limits at the Conservation Club. But there could be opportunities where, depending on what Mart Dock does, that there could be some opportunities to launch there, maybe not public, but right now they do launch larger boats at the current Mart Dock location for people that need them. But the reality is that, yeah, we do have that launch area there, but you can talk to the fishermen about the condition of those. I mean, they're in pretty rough shape anyway, and I think the language that they kind of had in there was, you know, as long as we can maintain them reasonably at a reasonable cost, we can still launch boats there. But at some point, those launches were, unless we made significant investments in them, those launches were going to go away or be unusable as well. But one thing that I think we've been hammering on, and I think we talked about this when we talked about raising marina and launch ramp fees last time, is we have like something like 20 different, 20 launch opportunities at 4 locations. You know, that is probably too many for us to really be able to maintain. And the idea of losing some down here, and maybe going down to just one launch ramp on the east side of the lake versus 6 or 8 opportunities at Fisherman's Landing now, and bringing people further into the city and letting them launch at Hartshorn or Cottage Grove or one of the other ones. I mean, I think once you put your boat on your trailer and hook it up to your car, you're leaving Jackson Hill. I don't think it's that big of a deal to go that extra mile, to Hartshorn. But I think the bigger thing is we'll want to make sure that we are paying attention to waterfront access, because people do like to fish over there and do other things that other than just putting their boat in. And I think you might find, if we talk to some of the neighbors, the more important thing for some of those folks is to be able to stop somewhere in that area and fish, because they do walk, over there and fish, but they don't necessarily walk and put their boat in.
Yeah.
So that would be almost even more important. I think that's probably something we'll pay closer attention to. But we do know that the DNR is going to, and we're anticipating that they're going to expect us to replace some amount of these boat launches somewhere on the east side of the lake.
Yeah, I would agree that it's more important that we have accommodations to fish
Access.
from land and having that waterfront access than just a boat launch. Because many people do use that as a form of sustenance. And so I don't want to take that
Hopefully,
away.
even though it's not Muskegon Lake, I think what long-term what we're gonna find are the changes and the improvements made to the fish habitat at Veterans Memorial Causeway Park. We might find that there are gonna be a lot more people that are gonna find that the most desirable place to fish anyway, because they're gonna get the best fish out of that little area there, especially if the fish are living in the boat condos that they built along the shoreline. That's a real word. You can put that in the minutes. Boat condos.
A question or clarification, and maybe things have changed since this letter was sent to us. I think is it conditions? Yeah, conditions for agreements. Because previously when we talked, it was a land swap essentially. I mean, we're going to be adjusted for price and going to be adequately compensated, so it's not just a one-to-one land. But it was my understanding Mart Dock was going to be taking ownership of Fisherman's Landing property. We'd be taking ownership of the L and then being compensated for any difference in property appraisal. But the conditions of agreement suggest that that we'd be leasing the Fisherman's Landing property to Mart Dock, not selling it. So has that changed, or is this really what we're considering, leasing the property, maintain ownership?
I might even ask the Mart Dock folks to explain that a little bit. I think there's been some thought that maybe, and I think this has maybe even changed a little bit, some thought that maybe if the ownership didn't change hands directly, maybe we could avoid some of the DNR issues, and also maybe we could still have access to some sorts of public funding when we're trying to rebuild seawalls and stuff like that. I don't know that that'd still be the case, but I think that's why we started down that conversation to say, hey, maybe there's a chance that we still swap, but it's more like a lease arrangement versus a land transfer of ownership, just to keep their options open as they're trying to, because once they do the process, they might find out that it costs $6 million to make that available and ready to develop on from a port facility standpoint. At that point, we might have to start looking for, grants and things like that otherwise are normally given to municipalities or municipal port operations. And so we wanted to keep kind of our options open, so that we could access those things if we needed to.
Okay. And my final question is, we're being asked to approve a letter of intent so we can go through the due diligence. But we're not, with this letter of intent, we're not necessarily giving tacit approval to every single detail in this letter. Because I know that there's some concern amongst commissioners about a few aspects there. So I just want to understand, we're not saying, okay, we're okay with everything that's in the letter.
Yeah,
and
this-
this is just allowing for formal negotiations to pursue and due diligence can be done on both sides.
Yep, yeah, the letter of intent, the big thing, that most important part about the letter of intent is it makes sure that MarDoc's not negotiating with other people to sell a Third Street dock, and we're not negotiating with other people to sell Fisherman's Landing or transfer Fisherman's Landing. And then it gives a general framework so that we all, for the most part, understand what it's gonna look like when it comes out, but the details they'll be fleshed out in the process, so we might find that, that their land is worth significantly more than ours, and, we have to make some different changes to it to make it feasible for either part. But I would just say, yeah, this is meant to be a very broad framework, but the big thing is that it gets us talking exclusively with one another about this, and us not, calling up for Plank or Consumers Energy or somebody else saying, hey, the Fisherman's Landing's on the block, if you're interested. It's agreeing that what we're really trying to do to get off underneath Fisherman's Landing is to get them over there, and making sure that everybody understands that that's what the goal is.
Okay, thank you. I'm supportive of this, and I just want to thank Frank and staff for fostering that discussion and those relationships with MarDoc, and I just want to thank MarDoc for putting forward this proposal for us to consider. I think this could be a win-win scenario.
So that means you're not gonna tender my offer, Max?
Wait, we'll hold off here.
Okay, just
What we
kidding,
have to do.
just kidding.
So the letter of intent is only allowing you and Mark Doc to be exclusive on the negotiation.
Yep, that's the big point of it, and if we get to a point where everything lines up and it makes sense, there'll be still a lot of details that this commission is gonna have to, aside from just an ultimate purchase agreement, we're gonna have to have agreements with the DNR about what to do with the grants that were handed out for Fisherman's Landing to begin with. There are a number of irons that are just getting set in the fire right now that they'll heat up pretty hot for us to deal with this, right?
Pretending that Max isn't here, tell him we'd like the green and the red going right. No, this is even better, going right on the side, going through his office. And we'll allow him to keep his cruise ship there rent-free.
Anything else? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Mayor Garland?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hood?
Yes.
Commissioner Warren?
Yes.
Commissioner German?
Yes.
Commissioner Rinsma-Siddiqua?
Yes.
Commissioner Turnquist?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Well, I hope you have a nice conversation, guys. Very good. Is there any other business to bring before the body this evening from the body? Commissioner Rinsma-Siddiqua.
I have this sheet. We didn't have a Community Relations Committee meeting this month because of the no work session last night. So we have been looking forward to the appointments. So we have a lot of terms that are expiring on January 31st for our boards and commissions. So we're trying to get that process going a little bit earlier. We already, invited people to come to the LC Walk Arena when we held the event on October the 30th and staff was there to talk about the talent bank application and what positions might be available, but Jackie has been working on contacting all the people, so the sheet that you have here is pretty much all the terms that are expiring, so you can start to get a feel for, and we used the same spreadsheet last year, so it is a little bit complicated, but if you go way over to this far right side, you can see where and then we've started a reappointment application now, so we have a different type of application. So for these people whose terms are expiring, if they're interested, it's indicated with a yes. And then if the app is received, that's also indicated with a yes or Y for yes. And then we have, some information about when they were appointed. And we have the current applications that we've received, we call new applicants, so that's way off there to the right. So we're not close to finishing this, but I think that we do hope to do a bit of a blitz over the next month before the December work session, because I think at that point we'd like to hold the meeting that we usually hold in January, so that we're actually holding the meeting where we're getting pretty close to who we're thinking of appointing in December. So we probably would have that longer meeting in December at the work session. And we would try to get some more applicants, especially when we notice ones where we don't have folks that are interested in reapplying and we need to fill some spots. So at this point, though, you can get a feel for who is interested in being reappointed and where we might have some openings and where our current pool of applicants would fit into this. So there's no other business at this point, but just to let you know that this is the update. If you could look at this, and if you have questions or input, pass that on so that we can hear that before we get to the more appointment type meeting in December.
Okay.
Yes.
If I could, one thing that staff is going to want to bring up at that CRC meeting, so not to kind of surprise you, the DDA is requesting that you add 2 more members to the DDA. Statutorily, you can have up to 12 members plus the city manager. Right now, we're at 10 members and the city manager. And as a group, they've recently paid off some debt, and they're looking to kind of be more active and get on a regular meeting schedule and kind of start to supplant some of the things that downtown Muskegon now has done. They're looking to add a couple more board places so that they can maybe bring in some of the people that are leaving the downtown Muskegon now board, so they can have that continuity there. And one easy way we thought we could do that would be to add a couple spaces. And statutorily, we have two more available spaces. And so we'll be asking, instead of just, I think you have 1 resignation, instead of just filling that resignation, add 2 additional spaces, so we'll fill 3 spaces for the DDA instead of just 1. And you probably don't even have the resignation on there yet because it came in today.
Is that for Ron Peck?
Yeah,
It's on.
it's on there. Okay, good.
Jackie keeps it very up to
I
date.
guess so. Well, Jackie does.
Commissioner
I
Johnson?
asked her to print it right before the meeting.
There you go.
Foremost, I want to thank Dan and Jackie for compiling this and updating this. This is really helpful for our consideration of CRC. But just a clarification, because that was on the email thread that, or I was CC'd when Eleanor emailed in her interest or whatnot to Samantha Poulos Porter, or maybe it was Dewana. But anyhow, she indicated that she would like to serve on the CDC, but she really wants to serve on the Equal Opportunity Committee. So if her serving on EOC precluded her from serving on CDC, then she's fine with not being considered for the CDC. So I just wanted to clarify that. So it wasn't exactly she's undecided, she just would much prefer to serve on the EOC. So
Yeah, I got that note, so we'll try to keep track of all those circumstances
The
and
nuances.
as best we can to represent them on here so that we can, all know what.
okay, so you did see that,
Yes.
or it was forwarded to you. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner?
Yeah, I would just like to compliment and thank Ann, who's not here, and Kim, and our city clerk's office for the smoothness of how they've run an election. And how they're out there in the field helping us.
When was that?
I think they actually helped out another municipality too, quite a bit on election
Yeah.
day. So not only did they run ours, they spent quite a bit of time at one of our neighboring cities helping them.
People were happy visiting and.
No, the lines weren't as long as we thought they would be. I mean, they just didn't take as long. We had lots of people vote, though.
Right. You guys do a great job, and our election volunteers are just tops and just great folks. So thank you. Commissioner Warren?
I don't know if anybody wants to talk about it today or if people have thought about it more. We had talked in the past about maybe in February having like the how to be involved with your local government type of thing. An event here, talking about the channels at City Hall, as well as farmers market opportunities. We just talked about things besides just the boards. I didn't know if we wanted to put it on a work session or if we wanted to, I know it's getting late, if we wanted to talk about that at all now, but just something to put a bug in everyone's ear as a reminder, to think of ideas and what that evening might look like.
Because we're having that, right? Are you working with Ann on that? That's what I understood.
Yeah, so that's what, if that's still good with you, which I think it is,
like I said,
I don't wanna,
To not to go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So I will be working with Ann. We haven't started working on that yet. But yes, we are planning that. It's very beginning stages, and I'll be working with her on that.
Yep.
Okay.
I know, I'm sure I'm happy and others would be happy to help. But basically a CRC meeting that would be more along the lines of how to get involved in your city, and Deb has some holding that special CRC meeting.
Yeah, and I just think about, I went through Muskegon and Focus years back, and Frank, I think you actually did some sort of kind of local government 101 that when you're working in it every day, it seems really basic, but to just the average, I want to be engaged citizen, it's not so basic. And so just kind of trying to replicate some of that and open to any and all ideas of what else that could consist of. But I think it's a really valuable thing for us to be a part of, from an education, proactive, really utilizing all that engagement, everyone that came out to vote and wants to have a voice, how we use that.
And actually, we get pretty good positive feedback about that city, state, it's like county, township, city government one that I do, and we could always do that too at that. It didn't take very long, like 15, 20 minutes. It was, I think it was very engaging myself, personally.
That's good. You're
Maybe
so
someone
damn
else.
cute.
But what do I know?
Anything else, commissioners?
Oh, I've got more.
Oh!
Just a question as far as an update, I'm wondering about the park inventory. We have a lot of parks. We have 34 parks, I think, give or take. Some of them we own, some of them we don't, but we maintain. Some have softball, some have horseshoes. I mean, we got a lot of parks. And maintenance is on a lot of our minds, maintaining those, especially as we consider adding more recreation space. And so just wondering if that will be coming before us maybe at the beginning of 2019 or later, or
Sure, we can talk about the timing. I actually just met with Bernadette for the second time this morning. So we've developed a list of wants and needs, and we went through and prioritized the parks today. Our next step was to ask the Parks Department and engineering to do some cost estimating, so we have an idea of what might be in front of us, at least for capital. And so we're making good progress, and I probably need to talk with Beth and Frank about what's likely to be available to do some capital improvements.
with those wants and needs, is it more maintaining current operations, or does some of that include maybe moving amenities to a different park, or some restructuring? Is any restructuring included in that?
Yes,
Yes.
all of that.
All of that, okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Speaking of parks, so have we started with the tree trimming and pruning in McGrath Park?
Yes, we
That's
have.
underway?
And we even borrowed equipment from the county so we could do it faster.
Okay,
And make good use of time when we don't have snow on the ground.
right,
So, yeah, they started.
excellent. And so when should we expect an update or a report on the future of McGrath Park and disc golf at that park?
Well, my intent is to open it in the spring. So, we'll just kind of have to see how the trimming goes throughout the winter as winter does what it does to us. Because right now, we can go there and just start. The idea is to go in now before we have blizzards and get everything onto the ground. So cut everything that needs to be cut, and then come back throughout the winter season as time permits to clean up.
Okay.
So McGrath Park is gonna be a bit of a mess, for the winter, but the idea is that we will get all that done and be ready in the spring to put baskets up in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, commissioners? Now, we'll move on to public comment. Members of our community, our friends and neighbors, are welcome to come up for comment and questions. Each individual is given 3 minutes. And if we can't answer your question, then I'll dump you on the smartest person in the room in order to start the discussion with you at another point, so stay behind if we can't answer tonight. First up, I have Michael Howeisen.
Still here.
Are you awake, Mike? Okay.
Michael Howeisen, 903 Turner Avenue, Muskegon, Michigan. Evening, Mayor, Commissioners,
Evening, Mike.
Director of DPW. I have an idea to float by you that may save you some money. Now, we're having a fun night talking about parking, aren't we? I was down to your meeting at the Walker, looking at some of the plans and stuff, and another person brought up in front of me about the parking situation down there. And you happened to mention to her that you were considered, one of the possibilities would be to shut down half of Shoreline Drive. And that kind of struck me as odd, because I'm going, the whole reason that we put Shoreline Drive in was to increase traffic to where? And now you want to cut it in half? Right? Your cart's not only getting ahead of the horses, it's kind of dragging them down the road, isn't it? And I did check the speed limit, it is 40 there. I said 45 when I talked to you, but it's 40. You need to get together with disability people and figure out how you're going to get people safely parked and traffic flow into and out of this convention center that you guys are determined to have. I mean, if you're going to have it, let's do it right. And not just have parking across the street and have them trying to cross Shoreline Drive at 40 miles an hour. That's all I had to say. It was just fix the parking first, worry about the convention center second, because you can't do it the other way around. You really can't. Not do it safely.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a great night.
Okay.
Thank you. You too.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to address?
Mayor, Commissioner, staff, Dave Alexander, Executive Director, Downtown Muskegon now. And I just want to say that as a Chronicle business editor back in 1992, I wrote a story with Max McKee, sort of introducing him to our community when he arrived back at that point. Really focused on Cross Lake Ferry reinstatement to Milwaukee, but at that time, the intent of Sand Products was what you are seeing in your letter of intent with the Mart Dock at this point as you move forward. The potential of mixed-use downtown waterfront development on the Mart Dock is huge. And it's game-changing not only for our city, but Lakeshore community in West Michigan. And anyone who has been around the decades that I have in seeing this community develop, it's stunning in a way. I can't overstate the significance of the potential development in this property swap, and that DMN stands ready to encourage and support the intent and the direction of the letter of intent. And I say to the city and to Sand Products, good luck in moving forward.
Thank you, David. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment or ask a question? If not, Vice Mayor, take us home.
I move to adjourn.
Support.
It's been moved by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Commissioner Renzema Savinga to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any in opposition? Same sign. I don't hear anything. Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming out, folks.